Okay, so I think we should start.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So should I introduce?
Yes, sir. You can start with it so that by that time.
So Professor Jagmohan, now you can start recording. Professor Jagmohan,
Ji.
now you can start the recording with you.
Welcome you to this webinar series by the All India Forum for Right to Education on the education policy and its intricacies. Dr. Hargopal will be addressing this seminar today. And I now invite Dr. Vikas Gupta, our office organizing secretary, to introduce Professor Hargopal. Dr. Gupta, please.
Thank you, Professor Jagmohan. So I feel honored to welcome Professor Hargopal, member of the Presidium of the All India Forum for Right to Education, to address the second episode of our webinar series on the draft National Education Policy 2020. And as you might have noticed, unlike the popular impression, I am using the word draft National Education Policy because that is how it should be treated. And I feel honored to share that Professor Hargopal has been involved with education movement through his work in the Save Education Committee, Undivided Save Education Committee for more than 3 decades. Professor Hargopal is currently visiting professor at Bangalore National Law School of India University, where he has been teaching public policy to master's students. Before it, he has been teaching as a professor of political science at Hyderabad University, and there he was also instrumental in setting up of the Human Rights Center. Besides this, he has been the editor of Human Rights Journal. Professor Hargopal is a known name in civil liberties movement. Professor Hargopal is also the chairperson of Kishore Bharati, besides being the member of the Presidium of the All India Forum for Right to Education. Professor Hargopal's writings include a wide range of themes and issues. He has published 4 books, edited 3 in English and 3 in Telugu. And particularly his work on marginalization, development and resistance, focusing on the Dalits, Adivasis and the urban poor is worth mentioning here. Besides this, he has contributed more than 60 articles to national and internationally peer-reviewed journals, etc., etc. So, there's a long list of his contribution to academics as well as rights-based movements in India. And on top of that, working with Professor Hargopal for more than a decade now, I would like to say that he is truly an inspiring personality. So it's an honor to invite him to speak today on the National Education Policy 2020 as approved by the Cabinet. And he will look at it from the perspective of political economy. So over to Professor Hargopal.
Yeah. Am I audible, Vikas?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Yeah, okay. Professor
Kenneth,
Jagmohan.
once you complete your presentation,
Ah.
and you will have 30 and maximum 40 minutes. But since we are running late, so maybe 30. And then Diksha will give a gist of your presentation in Hindi, hopefully in another 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Professor Jagmohan ji and Dr. Vikas and friends, I am very happy to meet again Jagmohan ji, while personally we can't meet, but at least through this media, and I'm more particularly happy that I am able to see Vikas and this program going on. In fact, when I talk of political economy, when I teach public policy to my students, I always start with a joke. That joke has a very serious content, but nevertheless, it's a joke. When two rats are harassed by a cat, they go to a monkey for an advice. Monkey says, "You become dogs and threaten the cat." Then rats say that how do we become dogs? Then the monkey says, "Policy formulation is my job, implementation is your responsibility." So in other words, the policy making, and if you look at this document, the rhetoric, the romantic, way certain things are put, look very interesting. But if you have to situate the entire public policy in its larger context, and I will have a quick review of how the education policy has been changing as the political economic context has been changing. There is almost a one-to-one relation between the education policy and the changing political economic context. If you go back to the historical, this one, everybody knows that this is one country which has denied education to the large sections of the society for centuries. And perhaps only during the freedom movement, the idea of everybody having access to education, thanks to the Phule, Savitribai Phule, Dr. Ambedkar, partly Gandhi, Tagore, and a number of people. If you ask Anilji, he will list out all the regional leaders and regional visionaries of education. But this idea that everybody should have access to education was one of the freedom, aspirations of the freedom struggle. And that resonates partly in the Constitution of India, but I wish that they made it a fundamental right, when the Constitution was being drafted. But if you look at the debates, Dr. Ambedkar did want, but I think a number of people said it will not be feasible, we will not have the resources. If it is made a fundamental right, it will become a problem. And in the process, Dr. Ambedkar pushed it into directive principles instead of this being the fundamental right. But nevertheless, the Constitution resonates the aspirations of the people. But what is very surprising is after Radhakrishnan Commission in 1948, still the Constitution was being drafted. In fact, it was that committee which has recommended University Grants Commission. And calling University Grants Commission, the idea is that the funding is very important. Grants are very important for education. And they thought that the University Grants Commission has only the job of funding, financing, and broadly providing the guidelines, but they would not dictate the education system of this country. But today, if you look at the UGC, unlike what was expected of it, now they say you must conduct examinations. And today morning, I had a webinar in the Bombay University, one of the colleges. The principal and everybody is complaining, how are we going to conduct examination? Practically, it's not possible. Students are in the rural areas. And then they said they have to provide certain flexibility. But this education policy talks of light but tight. What it means, nobody knows. Whether it is a tight or whether it is light. But the tight is more important than light. I think that's the internal essence of the whole thing. But we took almost 20 years or so to appoint the Education Commission, Kothari Commission. And Kothari Commission, when it was appointed, India was already becoming a restless India. There was a rural unrest, and if you look at 67 to 71, there were several movements, struggles, social movements, identity movements, the separatist movements, secessionist movements, autonomy movements, Naxalite movement. You find several movements, and the Kothari Commission perhaps was responding to the growing unrest. And education being one of the important aspects of public policy, that perhaps was the reason why they emphasized on common school, so that everyone, irrespective of their economic, social, and cultural background, would have access to education. In 1966, that was the political context. And by 1970, you know that how Mrs. Gandhi's political rhetoric of talking, reduction of poverty, then Garibi Hatao, then nationalization of banks, then the monopoly restrictive trade practices, land reforms, that was the political economy context. But from 71 to 85, when we had a new education policy, Kothari Commission was the only document which was available in the light of which policies were, the education was carried out, but the economy was not doing well. The economy was struck with 2.5% rate of growth, and they thought agrarian reforms perhaps can be a stimulating factor, but we failed miserably in bringing agrarian reforms. And by 1980s, the ruling classes realize or recognize, they say that the Indian economy is not growing because it's a capital-intensive society. I think this is where our real problems started. Instead of using the labor, which is a productive force, and the labor which is, it's with a huge manpower and the labor power. After all, capital is product of labor. But you find that the laboring classes, were not skilled, they were not educated. In fact, one of the estimation is if only we had provided education to all the people, the economy would have grown 44% higher. One estimation is that the growth would have picked up if only our labor power was skilled and their productive capacity was increased by the education. But we have not done that. And we have denied education to the huge laboring class. And in the process, you find that the wrong diagnosis of the economy is that we have with a capital deficit society. Therefore, Mrs. Gandhi's second regime after the 71, the whole rhetoric changes. 71, she was talking of the Ekta and Akhandata, unity and integrity of India. There were all national integration seminars. I don't know how many national integration seminars we attended. But 83, we go for borrowing. And once you went for the international global capital came not as a loan, but it came with the conditionalities. And one of the conditionalities of the loan, in fact, I tell again a joke in public meetings that when you go to World Bank, they say that how much of loan you want for, let's say you go to for a loan for a daughter's marriage, and they say we'll give you a loan and to conduct a grand marriage. We'll give you, if you ask 1 lakh, they give you 5 lakhs, the interest rate will be low. And they will say the installments will be, very comfortable and all that. But then they say there's one condition. The condition is son-in-law will be chosen by the World Bank. But that's how they want to control the vitals of the economy. They want to control the entire, they dominate the entire economic process. And therefore the market, and the market's assertion with the global capital has started getting accentuated. And therefore, the 85 policy comes in response to that. And 1985 policy brings in a little duality in the system, Navodaya schools, opening up a little bit of market. And but one good thing, at least about the 85 policy, was for 2 years it was debated. 87, and it comes into effect in 1992, when the economic reforms really picked up with Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh. It comes into effect. But then in the 1980s, we have done reasonably well. If you look at the decade of 1980s, we had unrest in the industry. There was almost peace in the industry. There was not much of unrest in one sense in large parts of India. And then 80s economy picked up and we got 5.6% rate of growth. But the end of the 80s, when the economy had done well, 2.5% we had somehow surviving. But by the time the economy started doing well, and you come to the 1980s, we are told that the economy is in deep crisis. And at least that was the time when there should have been a serious introspection that where have we gone wrong? But instead of the introspection, because where we have gone wrong was that the exports were very limited and the imports started getting relaxed, and you have imported more than exported. Therefore, you ended up with the foreign exchange, crisis. And when you import more, and that was the time when they should have talked about how to raise the production in India and how to indigenize, how to raise the educational levels of the people. In fact, there should have been a correction. But what was the cause of the crisis was the remedy that they thought was the solution, and therefore you go for more loan, and with the result the capital and the market comes, and in the process, because American economy was in a crisis, they wanted the global market and they wanted every sector to be open, including education. And education starts completely becoming a market centric, and by the time we come to late 90s or 2000, 21st century, they called so-called 21st century. Now the whole shift is that what to do with education. And after 1985, one important intervention is the Knowledge Commission. And if you look at Knowledge Commission of Sam Pitroda is a foreigner. He settled abroad. He doesn't know Indian realities. But why Sam Pitroda was brought? It was global capital, which pushed Sam Pitroda. And he started sending like Woods dispatches, all sorts of, there is no comprehensive report of the Knowledge Commission. He started sending, all sorts of, suggestions. And when we had a seminar in the University of Hyderabad, and we had an interaction with Sam Pitroda, I asked him, what is the purpose of knowledge? Because you are heading the Knowledge Commission. He said, increasing the production, enhancing the consumption. I think from Kothari Commission, who said, so education is the conscience of a nation, education should respond to social needs and not wants. Now, from social needs, now you come to completely to wants. And therefore, the market becomes very powerful. But between 2004 and 2009, because the CPM party was also supporting, they were withholding, they were restraining the government and all that. But 2009, Congress party was full hog. And between 2009 and 2014, there were 6 bills as a part of the structural adjustment, changing the education system, education tribunals, foreign universities, private universities, everything has come. And for the idea of bringing the foreign universities was between the 2009 and 2014. Sam Pitroda came, Kapil Sibal and Sam Pitroda, both of them came to the Vice Chancellor meeting. I was supposed to be heading the panel on the social justice. And Kapil Sibal says, he didn't speak, he spoke for 10 minutes. And he said that one of the problems with India is I am not able to push through the foreign universities bill. And today one of the presidents of American universities came, and when he said, when is the foreign university bill coming? He said, I had to hang my head in shame. That's what, Kapil Sibal said. You can see how much of pressure was there on the government as far as the educational policy is concerned. And Sam came and said, introduce technology, and you can as well close reduce the staff, connect your universities to Harvard and Stanford. You'll have the best of the minds and all that. Now imagine from the Kothari Commission to Knowledge Commission and to Sam Pitroda's type of thing. That I think is one of the important shifts that have taken place because of the change in the global capital, corporate capital, in the nexus between the two of them, and the feudal forces in the agrarian economy. I think there was an excess, and therefore it has become very aggressive. Capital has become very aggressive, and therefore they wanted to enter into education, because in India, educational sector is one of the attractive sectors, because there are 20% of people who have the purchasing power, and because of the neoliberal reforms, at least 40% have marginally benefited. Out of that 20% definitely benefited, but 1% of the people control 54% of the GDP. And roughly 40% of the people, they control, 27%. Let's say 40%, putting it very liberally, have 77% of the GDP. If there is an increase of 1 rupee national income, there's 56 steep in education policy. You can see the result, consequence of the steep economic inequalities. And if you consider education as an equalizer of opportunities, as a facilitator of social mobility, then in fact education is a change agent. But instead of considering the education as a change agent, education policy is reinforcing the structure, existing iniquitous structure, and iniquitous structure produces such such educational policies. So today's education policy is a response to the demands of the global capital, corporate capital, and this policy, comes with different notions of education, and they talk about no profit, universities. I mean, capital, the nature of the capital, nature of the market is to make profit. That's the defining characteristic of market. How do we expect the market to play a philanthropic role? Yes, there was a philanthropy because of the nationalist movement. And Tatas and Birlas, when they entered the education sector, Tata Institute of Social Science, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, would they have created? No, definitely it was a product of what we may call nationalist, sentiment and the philosophy, at least philanthropy. Birla started Pilani Institute, but they never made money out of it. But today, look at any private university, their entire motive is the profit. But the document says that no profit institution, only philanthropy. You should ban, you should, and there should not be commercialization. All this the document says. But you are in conflict with the existing economic structure. Are you in a position to withstand the pressure and only allow the philanthropy into the education system? And where is that philanthropy? Azim Premji University also, one or two people may be there, but where is that philanthropy? And when the Reliance entered in the education system, imagine that out of the 6 institutions of excellence, the institution which never existed was considered one of the institutions of excellence, and they provided 1,000 crores by the government to be started university by Reliance. Now you can imagine where is the philanthropy. I mean, these are all the people who are absolutely profit hunting. That's why Economic Times wrote an editorial that if you say that no profit institutions, you are making a self-goal. How do you expect the people to invest in education without making profit? In Economic Times came out very clearly in its editorial. That is the response of the capital to the existing policy. So philanthropy, is a very romantic term. But where is that philanthropers and where are those generous people? Where there are people concerned with the poor people, marginalized sections of the society? And when the document says 50% of the students in the private universities will have to be subsidized or will have to be supported. I mean, where is it that? How would they support unless they cross-subsidize? So you raise the fee from the upper strata and cross-subsidize, but they are not the people who are coming out of the welfare concern. They are coming out of because they think there is a market, there is a vibrant market. This 20% of the people who have a lot of income, who are already sending their children abroad, they are trying to tap that part of the industry. And that's the reason why this document is a product of that. But one of the contradictions of the document is, on the one hand, you want to traditionalize the education and you want again 21st century aspirational India. 21st century aspirational India, but the ideological position of the present regime is medieval. So how are you going to reconcile a medieval, the framework with the ultra-modern? That's the reason why you talk of ultra-nationalism and you talk of the ultra-modernization. And I am sure that this is going to create a major contradiction when the policy starts getting implemented. So you find that as far as the school education is concerned, perhaps they will have more of an influence of the traditional values, culture, and all that, because that is the formation of human mind. But as far as higher education is concerned, they may respond to the global needs. And they have to now reconcile these two. That's why you find school education, having one thrust. And, when you come to higher education, you are completely inspired by, global models. And when you talk of the 5+3+3 and +4, whom are you, formulating this policy? And then they are talking of vocational education, they are talking of the skill formation, they are talking of the dropping out, they are talking of, a system that from the 8th class you want to vocationalize education. Fine. Because now you want, the skills as a productive force. Okay, if you want skills. But a skilled man also has to be an educated man. You have to first create enlightened citizenry and then give them the skill. If I'm an engineer, I'm a first human. I'm an educated man, I'm an enlightened man, and then of course I have a skill. I'm an electronic engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer. But if you do not give the enlightenment to the student, then you will have a citizenry who will be socially insensitive, which we are now observing already in the health system. And we have already observed how the state responded to the migrant labor. So in other words, you have to insensitize the society. If at all, you have to push through the education policy. So with the result, you push the people into traditional mode of knowledge, in the formative state, and then you say that interdisciplinary approach, broad, this one, multidisciplinary, all this language, language from abroad. This is not our language. And the 4-year degree course, as one of the examples, because Vikas knows, because they passed through this turmoil, 4-year degree course was introduced, and when we were debating why Kapil Sibal was insisting 4-year degree course in the Delhi University, in fact, the idea was that American universities or foreign universities started asking that when we have 4-year degree course in America, and if you have a 3-year degree course in India, how do we admit your students to our post-graduation program? Because they are not eligible. And if we start admitting 3 years graduate to our universities, American students will ask question, why 3 years in India and why 4 years in America? They wanted a parity. Therefore, they said that introduce 4-year degree course. And under that pressure, he introduced 4-year degree course, and Vikas would be able to narrate more graphically what happened to Delhi University, what a great Belmal was there. Now, therefore, when you restructure the education system, what I want to say is that since the Indian economy has become completely part of a global capital and the corporate capital has become very aggressive, we have created an education policy to respond to these needs and not respond to the needs of the people and respond to the needs of the aspirations of the people. So therefore, I think the political economy of your society, influences and shapes your policies. Today, let us understand from a mixed economy, from a welfareist economy, from direct to principle of state policy, we completely move to a full-blooded, globally driven economy. And that exactly is the context which shaped the new education policy. And this new education policy, if we have to fight, All India Forum for Right to Education, we are entering into the debate with the development model, because we first would like to say that equalize educational opportunities. This is our demand. Now, whatever might be the obstacles, and as the popular consciousness is built, that why their children do not have access to quality education, affordable education, or free education, what we have been demanding. I think that is going to be the contribution of AFRTE to the educational movement. Perhaps after the freedom movement, there was no movement in the post-independent India education movement. There was no All India movement. Perhaps for the first time, All India Forum for Right to Education has taken up this cause, and we are fighting a very, very powerful, formidable, adversary. But at the same time, history will always move on the basis of resistance. History also shaped the resistance, also shaped the history. And therefore, when we are questioning the entire new education policy document, we are questioning from the point of view of the people, from the marginalized, because in this model, in this education system, they don't refer to caste, somewhere in the bracket dimension, the graded inequalities, discrimination institutionalized, they don't talk about that. They don't talk about the reservations at all. They talk of the merit-based and the promotion, even the promotion based on merit. And what is this merit? Nobody knows. One of my students always used to fight with me, sir, merit is the only thing, merit is very important. He joined with me for MPhil. I asked him to work on the concept of merit and introduce the academics as a cross section of the society. And at the end of the research, he said, sir, I'm so confused. I said, you have been talking of merit for the last 2 years when you were a student of MA. But now you say that, sir, merit can't be defined. Merit is a highly subjective factor. The knowledge of the rural knowledge, poverty, deprivation, inequalities, discrimination, which is the rich experience that a child has from rural India, is also knowledge. It only has to be conceptualized. But the entire emphasis of this document is on the merit, and the marginalized sections are excluded in one sense. And if this policy is completely implemented, whatever little justice that the marginalized sections enjoyed, I am afraid that they will lose. I don't know why Dalit movements are not taking the movements and the policy seriously, why the tribal movement. In fact, this education policy should come as one of the important agenda on the agenda of the Dalit, tribal, women, minority movements, because it is going to take away whatever little welfare, whatever justice we have provided. So therefore, I would think that it is fighting with the political economic structure. So concentration of wealth, concentration of knowledge, and the cultural centralization. And that's the reason why the entire education is centralized. Now the National Human Education Commission or NCERT will prepare the curriculum for the whole nation. How is it going to be possible? But they want to control complete education system from Delhi. In my profession, that flexibility, that freedom is going to be taken away. I mean, that's going to be taken away because they know there will be resistance. My last point, policy formulator knows, is not a popular policy. They have not taken it to parliament. They should have taken it to the masses, saying that this is the policy we are formulating for you. Please support us. And there should have been a lot of enthusiasm in the society to welcome the policy. But you keep the policy document to prepare and you get the approval document to the parliament, which is a policy making body. The reason being that they definitely know that this policy is not going to click with the common people, because they have to explain the whole thing, foreign universities, private universities, and all that. It will not be possible. Therefore, there are masses waiting for somebody to take up their issue, voiceless people. And AFRT has a great historical responsibility of carrying forward the people's aspiration, not 21st century aspiration, but the aspirations of the masses of this country for a fair, just, equitable, and a humanistic society. I'll stop here. Then maybe we need the process of interaction. We may be able to clarify some of the points. Thank you very much, Vikas. Jagamohanji, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Shashank, go
Yes.
ahead.
Yes. As of now, thank you, Hargopal sir, for your wonderful thoughts being shared. We'll now request Deeksha to translate what Professor Hargopal has shared with us into Hindi, so that our Hindi viewers can also get to know what he was trying to touch upon.
Yeah, thank you, Shashank. I'm very happy to be on this platform, and I'm very nervous to summarize Hargopal sir, but I'll try my best. So, कुछ network problem की वजह से I missed some points, but then also I'll try. सर ने NEP 2020 को बहुत ही पुराने पास्ट से रिलेट करते हुए प्रेजेंट किया कि हाउ वाज द एजुकेशन, हमारा एजुकेशन सिस्टम कैसा था, और किस तरीके से जो मार्जिनलाइज्ड पीपल हैं हमारे कंट्री में, लो कास्ट पीपल हैं, लो क्लास पीपल हैं, उनको किस तरीके से एजुकेशन से हमेशा धक्का मारा गया है बाहर को. तो और सरकार हमारी जो प्रेजेंट गवर्नमेंट है वो ये क्लेम करती है कि ये जो हमारी NEP 2020 है वो ऐसी पॉलिसी है जो हर तबके के लोगों को इंक्लूड करेगी. पर सर ने अपनी बातों से इस तरफ प्रकाश डाला है कि किस तरीके से ये एक वहम फैलाया जा रहा है और किस तरीके से इस NEP 2020 का मेन मोटिव, सोल मोटिव है कि किस तरह हमें कैपिटल जनरेट करना है, किस तरह से फॉरेन फंडिंग हमारे देश में बढ़ानी है, और किस तरीके से एक बहुत ही सिस्टमैटिक तरीके से एक लेबर क्लास को मेंटेन करना है, और कुछ एक क्लास बनानी है जो कि गवर्नमेंट को सपोर्ट करे और उनके हिसाब से चले, और किस तरीके से मार्जिनलाइज्ड पीपल को नीचे ही छोड़ के चलना है। तो सर ने इस चीज की भी बात करी कि कैसे फुले अंबेडकर और हमारे जो सोशल एक्टिविस्ट हैं उन लोगों ने किस तरीके से एजुकेशन फॉर मासेस की बात को ऊपर उठाया। हम लोगों ने ये पढ़ा है कि किस तरीके से पहले कास्ट सिस्टम हमारे इंडिया में चलता था। लोग खुद भी यही सोचते थे, उन्हें इस चीज का कोई अंदाजा ही नहीं था कि वो भी ऊपर उठ सकते हैं। पर हमारे कुछ सोशल वर्कर्स और बहुत प्रोमिनेंट हमारे लीडर्स हुए, उन्होंने एजुकेशन फॉर मास का नारा दिया और इस चीज को स्थापित करने में उनका बड़ा योगदान है। और इसकी वजह से हम देखते हैं कि रिजर्वेशन जो है, एक रिजर्वेशन एक मैं सोचती हूँ कि बहुत अच्छी चीज है जो हमारे देश में आई और जिसकी वजह से डिफरेंट पीपल का पार्टिसिपेशन बढ़ा। पर हम इस NEP 2020 को देखते हैं कि ये इसकी बिल्कुल बात नहीं करती है। हमारे जो कोठारी कमीशन आया था, कोठारी कमीशन ने कॉमन स्कूल सिस्टम की बात की थी कि किस तरह कॉमन स्कूल सिस्टम जो है एक सोसाइटी के डिफरेंट क्लास के लोगों को इकट्ठा लेके आएगी, और किस तरीके से लोग एक ही जगह पे, एक ही स्कूल में, क्लास में डिफरेंट सोशल इकोनॉमिक बैकग्राउंड के बच्चे एक साथ आएंगे और कैसे सोसाइटी में इंटरमिक्सिंग होगी, और एक क्लास का जो माहौल है वो भी मल्टीलिंगुअल और मल्टीकल्चरल और इस तरीके से होगा। बट जो हमारी NEP 2020 है ये इसकी बात नहीं करती है। इसके बजाय हम ये देखते हैं कि ये क्लास में डिफरेंस क्रिएट करने का इसका एक बहुत ही हिडन मोटिव है जो कि हम लोग देख पा रहे हैं। पर अगर हम ड्राफ्ट को पढ़ेंगे तो वो हमें बड़ा ही ड्रीमी, बहुत ही, जैसे सर ने कहा, रोमांटिसाइज करने वाला है कि बहुत इसको देख के लगता है कि जैसे अब सारे दुख दर्द एजुकेशन के मिट जाएंगे, हम ICT इन्वॉल्व कर लेंगे, हम क्या बोलते हैं, टेक्नोलॉजी यूज करेंगे, और हम दुनिया जहान की चीजें हैं वो यूज करेंगे क्लासरूम्स में। पर मेरे खुद के एक्सपीरियंसेस हैं गवर्नमेंट स्कूल के, वहाँ पे अच्छा क्लासरूम भी नहीं मिलता है हमें, हम कैसे वहाँ पे ICT और ये सब इनकॉर्पोरेट कर पाएंगे। मुझे लगता है कि ये जो NEP है ये प्राइवेट सेक्टर, प्राइवेट स्कूल, यूनिवर्सिटीज, उनमें जिस टाइप की जो एजुकेशन होती है और जो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स में जो एजुकेशन होती है उनके बीच में गहराई और बढ़ाएगी। उसके बीच में ब्रिजिंग का काम नहीं करेगी ये NEP, ये और उसकी गहराई को बढ़ाएगी। कि जैसे सर ने कहा कि जो जैसे कैसे एजुकेशन जो है वो एक कैपिटल बनाने का जरिया बन गया है, तो जो कैपिटलिस्ट लोग हैं वो अपने इंस्टीट्यूशंस खोल रहे हैं, अपनी यूनिवर्सिटीज खोल रहे हैं, और कैसे उन्हें सरकार द्वारा फंडिंग मिल जाती है, और उन स्कूल्स में, उन यूनिवर्सिटीज में अमीरों के बच्चे ही पढ़ पाते हैं, और इस तरीके से कैपिटल, जो लोग अमीर हैं वही अमीर होते रहते हैं, उन्हीं को एक क्वालिटी एजुकेशन मिलता है, और जो हमारे मार्जिनलाइज्ड पीपल हैं, जो लेबर क्लास है, वो किस तरीके से धक्का मार दिया जाता है उन्हें एजुकेशन सिस्टम से। ड्रॉप आउट्स को लेके भी NEP बहुत ड्रीमी है कि हम उन्हें वोकेशनल कोर्सेज करा देंगे, और यूनिवर्सिटीज में डिफरेंट लेवल्स ऑफ स्टेपिंग आउट रखेंगे कि आप कोर्स को छोड़ सकते हैं, इस लेवल पे छोड़ सकते हैं, उस लेवल पे छोड़ सकते हैं। पर जब इस तरीके से ये प्रोसेस होगा तो हमारा कोर्स कैसे फ्रेम होगा, हमारा करिकुलम कैसे फ्रेम होगा, कैसे पता लगेगा कि ये स्टेप, मतलब यहाँ पे ये बच्चा कोर्स को छोड़ सकता है। हमने कह तो दिया है कि बच्चा अपनी सहूलियत के हिसाब से कोर्स को छोड़ देगा, बट लर्निंग का क्या, और जो बच्चे वहाँ पे कोर्स में रह जाएंगे उनका क्या, कैसे प्रोग्राम आगे चलेगा, उसके ऊपर कोई भी बात नहीं कही गई है। और रही बात GDP के 6% को खर्च करने की एजुकेशन पे, बातें बहुत सारी कह दी गई हैं, पर अकाउंटेबिलिटी किसकी होगी, कौन इस चीज को देखेगा, कौन, कहाँ कैसे फंडिंग हो रही है, और अकाउंटेबिलिटी की कोई भी बात नहीं है, बस बातें ऊपर ऊपर से कह दी गई हैं। हमारे जो इस पॉलिसी वाली समिति के जो चेयरपर्सन है मिस्टर कस्तूरी रंगन, वो भी बड़ा एम्फेसाइज करते हैं कि बड़ा ही अच्छा प्रोजेक्ट है, मतलब पॉलिसी है हमारी जो प्रेजेंट इंडिया की प्रेजेंट सोशियो इकोनॉमिकल पॉलिटिकल जो इसकी नीड्स हैं, जो कॉन्टेक्स्ट है इस टाइम पे इंडिया का, उसको काफी लुभाने वाली और उसको काफी तरीके से कॉम्प्लीमेंट करने वाली है ये हमारी पॉलिसी। वो इसको इस तरीके से प्रेजेंट करते हैं। बट अगर हम इसकी गहराइयों में जाएंगे तो हम बस यही देखेंगे कि ये सिर्फ क्लास और डिफरेंट कास्ट डिफरेंट क्लास के लोगों के बीच में सिर्फ गहराइयां पैदा करने वाली है, हमारे समाज में कुछ लोगों को बहुत ऊपर ले पहुंचा देगी। जैसे कि सर ने कहा कि 1% पीपल ही हमारी जीडीपी का 50% से ऊपर का हिस्सा जनरेट करते हैं। तो वही है कि ये पॉलिसी जितनी रोमांटिसाइज करी गई है, जितना इसको ड्रीमी बनाया गया है, असल में ये उतनी अच्छी है नहीं। काफी बहुत ही लिमिटेड लोगों को ये पॉलिसी जो है उनको फायदा पहुंचा सके, इस तरीके से इस पॉलिसी को फ्रेम किया गया है। और जैसा कि हम सब कहते हैं जानते हैं कि ये जो हमारी प्रेजेंट गवर्नमेंट है कैसे कितनी ज्यादा कैपिटलिस्ट है और कितना ज्यादा विदेशी निवेश को वो बढ़ावा देती है। तो ये पॉलिसी ये एजुकेशन पॉलिसी एजुकेशन को बढ़ावा ना देके हमारी सरकार की जो कैपिटलिस्ट और उनकी जो सोच है, उनकी जो रणनीतियां हैं, उनको और स्ट्रॉन्ग करने में हेल्प करेगी। जैसा कि सर ने कहा कि ये पॉलिसी एजुकेशन के लिए नहीं है, ये पॉलिसी किस तरीके से विदेशी निवेश को भारत में लाने के लिए है और किस तरीके से हमारी शिक्षा को पूरी तरीके से प्राइवेटाइज करने के लिए है। जैसे कि हम देखते हैं कि आजकल हमारे सरकारी स्कूल जो हैं उनमें अलग अलग एनजीओज और बाहर के फॉरेन जो कुछ ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस होते हैं, वो अपने टीचर्स भेजते हैं कि वो बच्चों को पढ़ाएं, वो हमारे टीचर्स को बताएं कि कैसे पढ़ाना होता है। हमारे टीचर्स जो इतने क्वालिफाइड होते हैं, रिक्रूटमेंट एग्जाम के बाद इंटरव्यू बाद वो स्कूल में लगते हैं, पर क्योंकि कैपिटलिज्म के तहत उन्हें फॉरेन इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ाना है, कैसे चीजों को अपनी गवर्नमेंट वाली चीजों को कैसे ओवरटेक करना है और कैसे गवर्नमेंट इन्वेस्टमेंट उनको कम करनी है, तो सारा फोकस उस चीज पे है। और जैसे कि कॉलेजेस में भी अब हम देख रहे हैं कि कैसे कॉलेजेस को बोला गया कि सेल्फ रिलायंट हो जाइए अब, और फंड की जगह उन्हें लोन मिलेगा। तो सारी इस पॉलिसी का मेन मोटिव है किस तरीके से प्राइवेटाइज कर दिया जाए पूरी एजुकेशन को और सरकारी फंडिंग जो है वो धीरे धीरे कम कर दी जाए, ताकि जो एजुकेशन है वो प्राइवेट सेक्टर के भरोसे छोड़ दी जाए और बस और फॉरेन इन्वेस्टमेंट है वो बढ़े। और इसी के साथ मैं कंक्लूड करना चाहूंगी कि ये पॉलिसी बहुत ज्यादा ड्रीमी है और बहुत ज्यादा हॉलो है। हम इसे हॉलो प्रोजेक्ट या हॉलो पॉलिसी कह सकते हैं। और एक एग्जाम्पल और है, डीपीईपी को भी हम एक एग्जाम्पल के तौर पे ले सकते हैं, किस तरीके से उसके तहत फॉरेन निवेश को हमारे देश में लाया गया था और इतना पैसा बाहर से आया, बट हमें ग्राउंड पे कुछ भी देखने को नहीं मिला। इसी तरीके से वर्ल्ड बैंक भी अब हमारे एजुकेशन सेक्टर को प्राइवेटाइज करने के फिराक में है और मुझे लगता है ये पॉलिसी एक प्लेटफॉर्म देगी फॉरेन इन्वेस्टर्स को, वर्ल्ड बैंक को, कि वो किस तरीके से हमारे एजुकेशन को एक मार्केट बना दें और बस सारा फोकस प्रोडक्ट और उसी पे रहे, क्या प्रोडक्ट मिल रहा है उस पे रहे, और प्रोसेस तो आई गेस ये जाता ही जा रहा है हमारे हाथ से। तो दैट्स इट, थैंक यू ऑल।
Thank you, Diksha.
Thank you, Diksha, for translating what Professor Hargopal had to say about the NEP. Now we will ask Professor Jagmohan sir to take the issue.
Mr. Sujit is having some question.
Yes.
We can invite Mr. Sujit too.
Surjit, can you unmute yourself and please ask your question to Dr. Hargopal?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, how are you?
It's a wonderful lecture, sir. It looks like Anilji and your lectures is just like well rehearsed, well choreographed musical show. It's wonderful. I don't have much question, but there are quite a lot of things. I wish that somebody transcribe your lectures and make it available to all of us. It will be wonderful. Because in my case, there was a lot of audio disturbance. There were some 2 or 3 simple questions. I wrote it, but I forgot it. Yeah.
I can help you reading your message. A skilled man must be also an educated man. Can we conclude that NEP 2020 endeavor to create skilled but uneducated laborers? What is cultural centralization? It sounds like a oxymoron.
Oxymoron.
Please comment.
Yeah.
And there was the rest part is that it will be available on audio and video, and that's a good suggestion. We can transcript also, so back to Professor Hargopal.
Yeah, in fact, Surjit, right now in the rural areas, I come from a village. There are many skilled people: carpenter, potter, blacksmiths, goldsmith. They never received any formal education, but they're skilled. Now, what happens is that they don't understand their own experience because they have not been given the necessary critical faculties, critical abilities to reflect on their society. I may be working in a particular area, I may be in a particular occupation, but I must understand my own experience in the context. And I should be able to relate my experience to the structure, why I have been denied. In fact, I may be, contributing to the production in my own low-skilled manner, but skill in this country has been separated from knowledge. Skill has always been separated from the education. Therefore, whatever has been the dichotomy that existed between skill and knowledge or skill and education for centuries, this document is reinforcing that. You are not even allowing somebody to complete the 10th class or a +2. So if you are talking of education from the 3 years to 18, at least up to 18 years, somebody should be exposed. But at a very young age, after the 7th or 8th class, you want vocationalization, and you want to give a skill. Maybe you will give some skill, but still they will remain as not a very educated persons, because they have not received the broad base of knowledge. So at least, when the Kothari Commission talked about 10th class, as one of the minimum, qualifications that people should have, and when they talked about 6 to 14 or whatever the Constitution says, but at least they thought that common school up to 10th class will be available to all the. Now this system, look at one is at the skills, dropping at the age of, maybe 12 or 13. And when you go to the graduation, they also do not want these children to complete graduation. After +2, they will get a diploma. After +3, they will get a degree. After fourth, they will get a graduation degree, which will make them eligible to go for research. Why do you provide exit points? And who will exit from the graduation after 2 years? Who will exit after 3 years? So obviously it is the weaker sections, those parents who can't afford, they will say, all right, 2 years we have educated you, we may not be able to support you, and therefore they will drop out. Is it not the responsibility of the state and the society to support a student who enters the graduation to complete graduation? Similarly, a student who entered the school, is it not responsible to at least complete up to 10th class? So I think this separation, this dichotomization between skill and knowledge, right, have been always there. I think this document is reinforcing that experience which we have had, rather than correcting the whole process and giving us, you know, I mean, its subject becomes a citizen because of education. So you will have an enlightened citizenry. We should have enlightened citizenry, then skilled. But dichotomization is a part of the India's educational philosophy, educational the legacy, and I think this document is reinforcing that. In fact, I just would like to add one point, because when I spoke about the capital, you know, making the profit, online education, because I was hurrying my lecture the completion, because you know, the online education is the completely digital, I mean, strategy, like demonetization, which digitalized the currency, and the crores of rupees the digital companies are getting. And online education is the strategy of the digital companies to reap huge profits by making the technology, you know, commercial, and thereby reap the benefits. The online education is not for the you know, modern technology being taken to the rural areas. Modern technology to make to allow the digital companies to make profits. Please, I wanted to add this point. Yeah. Thank you, Surjit.
Thank you, Sujit. Thank you, sir. There are a few more questions that are being asked. Deepak has asked, why should a carpenter send his son to the school to learn carpentry again?
I think that's what exactly I'm saying. They are reinforcing existing structure. They are not transforming the existing structure. It's a right question. So we don't want, even if the carpenter has to become an engineer, let's say, carpentry has to become modernized technologically. It has to be really, you know, belong to 21st century. Then first he should be educated. But you teach them carpentry, which his father would have taught him. Why should he come to the school? So you are not even upgrading the skills. You know, you are allowing the children to drop out at a very young age to learn a skill. I think vocationalization is reinforcing the traditional skills, maybe with a little more modernity. But you are not changing. Education is a transformer of a society. Education is a catalyst of changing the society. It's a change agent. But this education policy reinforces the existing structure, does not transform it. That's why, you know, why should a carpenter's son become a carpenter is the basic question. Carpenter's son should become an enlightened citizen and an engineer, and not a carpenter again.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Vikas Gupta has a question for you. I think, sir, will you?
You can talk. Dr. Vikas, would you like to? Dr. Vikas?
Okay, I thought that you will read out my questions. Okay.
You can read, but you can state it.
See, Professor Hargopal, I mean, again, like always, thrilling experience of listening you. I was wondering that how do we take this exclusionary design of the education policy effectively amongst the disadvantaged sections, you know, which constitute the bulk majority of our society and their leaders. That's one. And second, we know that essentially all policies have been exclusionary since no strong movement could be built in the past, strong enough to turn this upside down. How can we hope to be successful in building it today in a situation where all dissents are suppressed more vehemently than ever before in the past. This is the second thing. And the third is that you have maintained a distinction between the kind of cultural centralization at the school level and the promotion of the global, at the higher level. I was wondering that when we realize that even the school education is subjected to the Skill India, and which is basically a global agenda, whether this distinction is real or it is only a garb. I hope this third one makes some sense. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was making trying to understand. But when they said that the entire curriculum will be prepared by the NCERT, and if you look at one of the objectives, in fact, revamping of all aspects of education structure, including its governance, to create a new system of education aligned with aspirational goals of 21st century, including sustainable development goals, while building up an Indian traditions and value system. Now, if you look at this, I think the curriculum is going to be rooted in the traditions, traditional values. That is one aspect. So when I made this formulation, greater emphasis on the ideology of the present regime may be more incorporated at the school, because once you come to the professional courses and higher education, maybe even in the graduation and all that, they may tamper. But tampering, they are more interested in the 18th up to 18th year, as far as the traditional values are concerned. So I have a feeling that multidisciplinary approach, multi-dimensional human being and all that, they are talking in terms of a global, it was a very tentative formulation, holds good, or we have to further reformulate this particular formulation, but it was a very tentative formulation. When I was reading the document, it just struck me. I thought that I'll make this point and see the reaction, but your reaction is very right.
First time,
in terms of our own movement, how do we reach the marginalized sections? All these days we have been hoping, yeah.
No, I'm saying it is for the first time. It is for the first time that even in higher education, they have proposed two things. One, this General Council for Education, Higher Education, which they have proposed, will formulate, a curriculum framework for higher education. This is for the first time, I think, as a policy. And second, there are two other things that even for higher education they have proposed. One is value education, even for higher education. And second is, a set of skills. So that is why I was wondering that this value education thing plus the promotion of the this curriculum framework for higher education, which was up to now only for school education, but the first time they are also proposing it for higher education.
No, but because my feeling is that by the time they come to the graduation, I'm sure that as a teacher you must have experienced that students coming from the disadvantaged sections have always been raising the questions on what we teach. When I was teaching in Warangal, we had a very syllabus a little outmoded, and classroom was a big turbulent place. And they started questioning that what is the syllabus, what is this curriculum, how is it relevant? I mean, it doesn't address the questions of rural inequalities and all that. Then by the time they come to that, even if you incorporate, values, I'm sure that the human mind would have slightly developed, and some debate at least is possible. But when it comes to school education, they are more vulnerable. So I'm just trying to respond to that. But maybe they may attempt in higher education. But when 4-year degree course was introduced, how Delhi University resisted. So obviously there will be resistance at that level. but there may not be much of resistance at the school level. So I think this dichotomy will continue to exist, and we have to pass through this very painful experience if we have to at all implement this policy in our own education institutions. As far as the movements are concerned, because my own feeling is we have been negotiating with political parties, and we have met political leaders, political parties. I think we have not made an attempt to negotiate with the social movements. With the in combined Andhra Pradesh, we tried to address the Dalit groups and all that. They respond, but they somehow think that education is not their priority. The more of social justice, equality, reservations, some of these things. But this document for the first time do away with the reservations. They don't talk of reservation and affirmative action. So I think this document provides us enough of material or enough of strength to go and open up a dialogue and say, ask our Dalit friends, tribal friends, and friends from the different marginalized sections to reflect and tell them that this is the agenda and how do you react. Maybe this will open up a space for us to work together, hopefully. Document provides us perhaps ways and means of interacting, but I think we have to interact with the social movements, particularly Dalit movement, tribal movements, and the leaders of a lot of tribal Dalit leaders have emerged, but they have not addressed the education. But now we should tell them that you should address this education. But if the real agenda of this present education policy is explained, I have a hope that a lot of marginalized sections will start responding to our movement and perhaps take the education back into their political agenda or their social agenda, hopefully.
Shushan?
Yes.
There is
we can take one more question.
By Lakshmi Narayan. Lakshmi Narayan, please. Or in the meantime, Ravinder?
Is it audible?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
very good.
No, the first thing is this document says in the beginning itself that it is guided by the rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian knowledge and thought has been a guiding light for this policy. So basically the entire approach is defined here. And they also mentioned what is known as some great scholars of ancient India, like Bhaskaracharya, Brahmagupta, Aryabhatta, etc. And many historians say that they are all Brahminical scholars. Now, basically they are also a kind of a Hindu kind of Hindutva kind of people. And Gautama Buddha name is not there, Mahavir name is not there. Any thinker who is against Brahminism is not mentioned there. So, and in a situation when common people feel themselves they are also Hindus, how to convince them, how to engage them and say that this approach is against your welfare. So this is my first question. The other is about the PPP, the public-private partnership. But here, of course, they mentioned public philanthropic partnership. Now, what are its political implications, especially when you take the RSS running schools? Some of the schools may be so-called philanthropic because I was also told by some of my friends, some teachers work in RSS even for very less salaries. They have some commitment. So is it that they want to bring the RSS run thousands and lakhs of schools and distribute government funds to them in the name of public-private partnership? And the last thing is, I also want to know, somewhere we also may have to engage, what is a merit? What is the definition of merit? Because in the name of merit now, entire thing is denied. No reservations, as sir was saying. No, actually, they didn't even mention SC, ST, OBC in the whole document. There are no people like that. So somewhere is it not necessary for us to redefine what is merit? These are my questions.
No, Lakshminarayan, I think what you find in the document is if you read the inclusion part, in the bracket, they mention SC, ST, OBCs, minorities, transgender. They have mentioned it very as a passing reference. There is no focus on that. There is no thrust on that. But in a passing reference, they do that. But what the document has done is that it has, since it has avoided reservation and also social justice in terms of the one's own background and the deprivation, I think the document has opened a huge space for us for a dialogue. Our job is to explain to the movements of the marginalized that because reservation is a very sensitive question. You have seen what happened during Mandal Commission. They have, in fact, marginalized sections have been fighting continuously for greater reservations and greater opportunities and all that. But this document, I think they have committed a serious blunder, perhaps, by avoiding reservations. And they have continuously mentioned merit-based scholarship, not the caste-based scholarship. Today, scholarships are based on the caste because caste is one of the most, the burden, one of the factors responsible for the marginalization that they don't mention. So I think the document opened a space for us to carry a dialogue and explain to them that this is the agenda. And I have a feeling that perhaps the Dalit sections and the marginalized sections will start taking it more seriously. And you are also right that, in fact, because my time was cut by another 15 minutes. In fact, I have noted down what you said, the aim of education in ancient India was not just the acquisition of preparation for life in the world or life beyond school, but complete realization. This is what they say about the ancient India, right? And which is absolutely not true. And you are equally, when you emphasize rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian knowledge and thought, they have not mentioned Buddha, what you are very right. They have not mentioned the entire, Bhakti movement, which was a reformist movement. They have not mentioned, Phule and Savitribai Phule. They have not mentioned, but among the ancient, the thinkers, all these, scholars, maybe they were scholars perhaps at that point of time, but their concern was not social justice, but they want to revive that tradition. And by not including the Islamic tradition, by not including the traditions of India for the movements and social movements and a number of resistance movements, I think they are owning the heritage of one kind and not the heritage of the other kind. We have both the heritages of rebel Charuvakas were there, as the rebels Lokayas were there. Therefore, we are not mentioning that, but we are owning one particular heritage. We have to talk about the heritage of the marginalized. And I am sure that this debate can be carried very meaningfully, very intensely with our friends in the movements which are trying to mobilize the marginalized sections. I think you are right in that sense. And this philanthropy, you are right. But see, that's why I said that there is a contradiction. There is a contradiction. On the one hand, you talk of philanthropy. Maybe, the RSS and, some of these organizations may come with their own thing. But how many, they run 25,000, but there are lakhs of schools. They can't run all the schools. But the schools which will be private, they will be preparing the children for the foreign education, for all that. Private education will not prepare them because, then the parents will start resisting. So I think the private schools will be one thing. That's why they refer private schools, philanthropic schools, and government schools. And what they have done is that there should be twinning of the philanthropic, the private school and government school. They didn't bring philanthropic school. They said there should be a government school and there should be a private school. One should benefit from the other, and government school should benefit from the private schools. This is what they say. But somewhere this agenda, whatever the hidden agenda is there, we have to explore. And as the policy starts getting implemented, perhaps the agenda will be much more obvious. It will become much more manifest. But till then, we have to read between the lines. Well, since we have a critical view of the policy, we are not able to read the between the lines. But what Anil spoke about between the lines, we should be able to explain the policy and between the lines.
Ravinder, is that be-
Sir,
yeah, please. Go ahead.
sir, I didn't want to put a question. I just shared the.
Please speak out. Share it. You want it to be read?
It was audible, Ravinder. You can continue.
Maybe I will read out in the meanwhile. So Ravinder had noted
By keeping the feudal base intact.
yes. By keeping the feudal base intact, corporate capital wants to reap the fruits of human labor. Introducing exit points means nothing but pushing out students from education. And he had also noted that NEP 2020 sees skill in a truncated fashion, not in a rationalistic way. All that NEP wants is the semi-educated laborers who can accomplish the advantages of corporate capital. So
I think it's more a comment than a question.
Correct.
I think it's a very insightful comment. We'll take the comment. I guess yeah.
So I think Rajaya Damara has sent in a question. His question is, how does the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 system helpful in school education? Does this not lead to dropouts in a much larger scale?
No, see, the question is that they themselves are assuming dropout in the sense that
This is a bad bandwidth.
Seventh class is the market. And that's the reason why that vocational education, we have to see the details, how many years that would be, what will be the period of vocational education. Will it be 3 years, will it be 2 years, or is it that they will give 1 year still and they will push them out of the education system? We don't know, because those devil lies in the details, and the details are still not available. But definitely they think that one way of negotiating with the dropout is, instead of encouraging the child in the education, you push them in the name of the skill. And you may say 6 months, skill, or the 10 month, the 1 year skill, and then push the child into the labor market. I mean, that's possible. But we have to see the details, how they're going to work out vocational education.
So Sujit has again commented a thought, and he also has a question. One, he has referred to 2.2, section 2.2 or paragraph 2.2 of the NEP 2020, where National Mission for Literacy and Numeracy will give opportunity for to become volunteers in the mission. And he thinks that this is a space where the RSS and its parivar could largely intervene in a larger scale. His question on the other end has been, how do we distinguish between social movement and political movements? Where does EAIFRT find itself?
No, I think the distinction is right. Sometimes the social movements themselves are transformed into political movement, but the entire Dalit movement, and the Dalit parties, Bahujan Samaj Party and all that. But there is always, the Dalit movements, which are built in an autonomous manner. If you look at Jignesh, if you look at Chandrasekhar, these are all emerging voices. Sometimes they join formal politics and become the members from the Dalit movement. And some people like Aruna Roy, Harsh Mandar, they left the state and went to build the social movements. So I mean, now in the political party, now closes the political party and wants to join by the back. But social movements also have a little autonomy from the political parties, and they are issue based. Whereas political parties, its base is different, its goal is different. But there is a space where both of them meet. There is a space, both of them are independent of each other. I think we have to make the distinction between a social movement and a political party and political movement.
So I think we have covered up whatever questions that we have had here. In this note, could I ask Professor Jagmohan sir to propose the vote of thanks?
Thank you, Shushan. I think it was a very illuminating and talk by Dr. Hargopal. And actually, it raised many clarities in our mind, and also that action plan, which we should take it, is how to go to the people who are being marginalized with this. And it is interesting that earlier they had a skill development program, and then they started changing a narration that it is not for job, but it is for creating job. And one of my students has asked the data. They say we don't have any data how many skills we have produced. So actually they talk something and they mean something different. And I think in this also, and you have made it very clear that how this whole interest of the money is overtaking the society in this whole process. So I think it was very interesting, and I think it's rightly Sujit had asked that maybe we can try to transcript it. I will try to use some and take your help to finally bring it as a published material also. But this will also be going to our YouTube and because it is recording at least I have. So we will edit it and put it there. So thank you very much, Dr. Hargopal, for giving us this stimulating dose which is actually required for. So what Sujit is saying is All India Forum is a forum. It is a platform for bringing all the kind of social and social movement means those who are more concerned with the social well-being. Political movement is which only wants a political advantage out of those, and that somewhere something is there. So it is, and it has to go to the masses. And I always repeat that when Prime Minister says that 80 crore people have been reduced to so much misery that in 1 month 5 kilo grains and 1 kilo dal can put them off. So that means that they are in that process how to make people more dependent. And we are dilating on this. It was a very interesting discussion, and I think discussor like Dr. Vikas really raised some very fundamental question. Other discussers also, we are thankful to them for raising and making it lively. And I think this is our good experience that we have one speaker and more discussion on that instead of, and we will be continuing our, and I'm thankful to our, this webinar committee, which has done very good, and they will be taking it further, particularly to Shushank and Madhu, and particularly our young translator who tried her best to put the things into for those who are in Hindi. So maybe because so it is overall, I think it is a really good initiative, and I thank from heart. And let us continue with this. Uh, Collect the ideas, then take it to the masses, and our teams are working for mass dissemination of ideas. They are working on social media and campaigns for that. And I think we are coming closer to a unity point, and this is the biggest challenge I think for us to face. So thank you very much. Let us continue our effort, and we will meet again on next Tuesday with another speaker. Our committee will tell us, and Dr. Prasad, who is coordinating, They're doing wonderful. So thank you everyone who participated, and apologies. I will like to check with my what they happened because we could not go live on the Facebook. So we will try to check with that. We are learning, though I am professor of computer sciences, but every day. So the technology is putting us off the line, and that is online. Actually, online means putting us off the knowledge. So thank you very much. So we will meet again on Tuesday as per the schedule which will be given to. Thank you very much. So
Thank you, one and all, for this opportunity.
I think Vikas sir was saying something, but sir, you're on mute.